Welcome to the deep dive. Back in 1937, a book was published that contained a secret formula.
Yeah, a very specific, highly deliberate formula.
Right. And it was supposedly used by Andrew Carnegie to build, one of the greatest fortunes in human history.
Which is saying something.
Absolutely. And the author of this book, he referenced the secret over 100 times throughout the text. I mean, he teased it, he pointed to it, he built whole chapters around the edges of it.
But he never actually named it.
Exactly. He just, he left it hiding in plain sight. He insisted that you, the reader, would only recognize it when you were truly ready. So today, we are going to decode that secret together.
It really is the ultimate intellectual Easter egg. And to fully grasp what we're dealing with today, it's crucial to understand that our source material, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, is not a novel.
Definitely not light reading.
No, not at all. Actually, an associate of Thomas Edison described it as a literal textbook on individual achievement. Yeah. It's the culmination of a 25-year exhaustive analysis of over 500 of America's most successful men.
We're talking about the titans, right? The guys who built the modern world.
Exactly. Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, men who, in many cases, started with absolutely nothing, just thoughts, ideas, and organized plans.
And what's so amazing is that we are looking at this specifically through the lens of a brilliant audio reading, the one by Dan John Miller for the Master Key Society.
It's phenomenal.
It really is. I mean, Miller's voice, it brings this incredible, almost haunting resonance to the text. It forces you to slow down.
Right. He sounds so cinematic and premium.
Yeah, like you're listening to a deeply emotional, professional audiobook narration. When you listen to it, you really feel the weight of the 1930s, the desperation of the Great Depression, but also this fierce, almost defiant optimism.
That audio format is just so important here because, as we'll see, the text relies heavily on the rhythm of thought, the repetition of ideas.
It hits different when it's spoken aloud.
It does. Hearing it narrated by someone who understands that pacing gives the concepts a totally different psychological impact than just skimming words on a page.
Totally. And while the title explicitly says grow rich, and it definitely promises you can transmute this philosophy into material wealth, it's actually much broader than that.
Much broader. The text explicitly states that this exact same formula can bring you peace of mind, spiritual harmony, and even the mastery of physical afflictions.
It's a holistic wealth.
Right. Wealth in the absolute most holistic sense of the word.
So before we get into the actual mechanics of how this works, I want to ask you, the listener, directly, what do you want most out of life right now?
You really have to be honest with yourself here.
Yeah, be brutally honest. Is it money? Is it absolute financial independence? Or is it fame, power?
Or maybe it's just peace of mind. The ability to sleep through the night without that low-level hum of anxiety.
Exactly. Because whatever that thing is, our mission today is to provide you with the exact 13-step roadmap that these sources claim can bridge the gap between where you are standing right now and that ultimate goal.
And it all starts with one spark.
The very first step on the map, the spark that ignites the entire engine, which is desire.
But we really have to stop right there and be incredibly careful with that word.
Why is that?
Well, in modern parlance, desire is often conflated with a wish. You desire a cup of coffee, you desire a nicer car.
Right, like a casual preference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the text makes a massive fundamental distinction. The desire required here is not a mere wish. It's not a fleeting hope. It has to be a pulsating, keen, and absolutely burning obsession.
A burning obsession.
Yeah. It has to be a psychological state that transcends everything else. It basically reorganizes your entire cognitive framework around achieving it.
Let's ground this in reality because the text uses the story of Edwin C. Barnes to perfectly illustrate this. The difference between a wish and a burning obsession.
Oh, the Barnes story is incredible.
It really is. So Barnes was a young man who decided he wanted to work with Thomas Edison. And the preposition there is it's everything.
Right. He didn't want to work for Edison.
Exactly. He didn't want to be an employee. He wanted to work with him as a business partner.
Which is a phenomenally arrogant goal when you consider his circumstances.
Totally arrogant. He had two massive problems. One, he didn't know Thomas Edison. They had never met.
Not a great start.
No. And two, he didn't even have enough money to buy a passenger train ticket to Orange, New Jersey, which is where Edison's lab was.
For 99% of the population, that is where the story ends.
Yep. You look at your bank account, you see the impossibility of the goal, you shrug, and you go get a local job.
Because that's the logical thing to do. That's the barrier to entry doing its job, keeping out the casually interested.
Right. But Barnes didn't have a casual interest. He had an obsession. So since he couldn't afford a ticket, he travels by blind baggage.
Which means he essentially stowed away on a freight train.
Exactly. He rides a freight train to New Jersey. He arrives in Orange, walks into Edison's laboratory looking like an absolute tramp, like a hobo who just rolled out of a boxcar.
I can only imagine the receptionist's face.
I know, right? And he just marches up and announces he is there to go into business with the greatest inventor on Earth.
I always find Edison's reaction to this moment fascinating.
What did he say about it?
Well, years later, Edison reflected on that exact meeting. He said that even though Barnes looked like a tramp, there was something in the expression on his face that conveyed a total, unyielding determination.
Wow. He saw right through the clothes.
Yeah. Edison noted that when a man desires something so deeply that he's willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel, he is absolutely sure to win.
But he didn't just hand him a partnership right then and there, did he?
Oh, no. Edison wasn't crazy. He gave Barnes a menial job, sweeping floors at a nominal wage.
And Barnes sweeps those floors for 5 years. 5 long years.
With zero promise of a partnership?
Zero. No hint of a partnership, no promotion track. To everyone else in the laboratory, Barnes is just a cog in the machine, a guy with a broom.
But here is the psychological key. In his own mind, Barnes was Edison's partner from the very first day he picked up that broom.
That is so powerful. He wasn't waiting for the title to change his identity.
Exactly. He used those 5 years to constantly intensify that burning desire. He studied the business, he studied Edison, and he just waited.
And then opportunity finally arrives. But as the text brilliantly points out, opportunity is a trickster.
It rarely introduces itself formally.
Right. It usually sneaks in through the back door. It comes disguised as misfortune or temporary defeat.
Yes. And the misfortune in this case was one of Edison's own inventions. The Edison dictating machine.
What happened with it?
Well, Edison had built this new device, but his own sales force absolutely hated it. They thought it was clunky. They didn't think businesses would adopt it. They essentially refused to sell it.
So the whole project was stalling out.
Completely stalled.
But Barnes saw the gap. Where all these highly trained salesmen saw a dud, Barnes saw his partnership. He knew he could sell it.
Had the vision.
Yeah. So he pitches Edison, gets the contract to distribute the machine, and he sells it so successfully across the country that they actually created a slogan, made by Edison and installed by Barnes.
He quite literally thought himself into a partnership.
Yeah.
He made millions of dollars and proved that thoughts really are tangible things.
But I have to ask you, why did Barnes succeed? I mean, thousands of other people would have quit after year 2 of sweeping floors.
Because he burned the boats.
Burn the boats. Explain that.
It's a critical, historical, and psychological concept. When Barnes went to New Jersey, he didn't tell himself, well, I'll try this for a few months, and if Edison doesn't promote me, I'll go get a sales job somewhere else.
He had no plan B.
None. He left himself no psychological retreat. It was win or perish. He stripped away the safety net.
And that changes how your brain operates, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When you have a fallback plan, your subconscious mind knows it. And when things get incredibly difficult, like sweeping floors for half a decade, your mind will naturally steer you toward that comfortable fallback. Barnes eliminated the alternative.
Win or perish. That is intense. And the text provides a stark contrast to Barnes, right, with the story of R.U. Darby and his uncle.
Ah, yes, the famous 3 feet from gold story.
Yeah, so Darby's uncle gets caught up in the gold rush fever. He goes out west to Colorado, stakes a claim, and starts digging with just a pick and a shovel. And amazingly, he actually strikes a vein of gold ore.
Which is the ultimate dream.
Right. But he quickly realizes he needs heavy machinery to bring the ore up to the surface in any meaningful quantity.
The pick and shovel aren't going to cut it anymore.
Exactly. So he covers up the mine, travels all the way back home to Maryland, and he pitches his relatives and his neighbors. He raises the capital, buys the heavy drilling machinery, and ships it back out to Colorado.
And Darby goes out there with him this time.
Yep. Darby goes with him. They start drilling, and the very first car of ore they pull up proves that they are sitting on one of the richest gold mines in the entire state of Colorado.
A few more cars of that quality, and they'll be completely out of debt.
They'd be incredibly wealthy. But then The ultimate psychological test happens. The vein just disappears.
Just gone.
They reach the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold is gone. They drill and drill, desperately trying to pick up the vein again, but they pull up nothing but dirt.
So what do?
They do what almost any logical, rational human being would do when faced with that kind of crushing, expensive defeat. They quit.
They gave up.
They sell all of this highly expensive machinery to a local junk man for just a few $100s.
Yeah.
And they take the train back to Maryland in absolute shame.
But the junk man was a different breed.
How so?
He didn't just accept the failure at face value. He actually called in a mining engineer to calculate the fault lines and examine the geological makeup of the mine.
That's smart.
It's very smart. And the engineer does the math and tells the junk man that the previous owners failed because they didn't understand fault lines. He calculates that the gold vein is going to pick up exactly 3 feet from where the Darbys stopped drilling.
3 feet? Are you kidding me?
3 feet. The junk man starts drilling exactly where they left off, hits the massive vein, and pulls millions of dollars out of that mine.
Oh, that is brutal for the Darbys.
It is. But why did the junk man succeed? Because he knew to seek specialized expert counsel before accepting defeat as permanent.
Darby must have been devastated. I mean, he spent years back in Maryland working to pay back every cent he borrowed from his neighbors.
But he eventually recouped his loss, right? Many times over.
He did, because that excruciating lesson, stopping 3 feet from gold, it fundamentally rewired his brain. He eventually went into the life insurance business.
Which is an industry built almost entirely on rejection.
Exactly. But his internal operating system was completely different now. His philosophy became, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I will never stop asking men to buy insurance just because they say no the first time.
He used the failure.
He used it. He became one of a very small group of people selling over $1 million in life insurance a year. Failure had tricked him once, and he vowed to never let it trick him again.
And we really need to emphasize the timeline in Darby's life here. Because years before the gold mine incident, Darby actually witnessed the raw power of unyielding desire in a very different context.
Oh, you're talking about the 50-cent lesson.
Yes, this is such a striking story from the text.
It really is. So Darby was a young man, and he was helping his uncle grind wheat in a mill. And this uncle, he was a fiercely tempered guy who ran a large farm with sharecroppers.
Very intimidating man.
Very. And while they're working, a little girl, the daughter of one of the tenant farmers, walks into the mill. She takes her place at the door and quietly says to the uncle, "My mammy says, send her 50 cents.
Now, you have to keep in mind the social dynamics of the era. The uncle is a landowner with a notorious temper. He barks at her to go back home.
And what does she do? She politely says, yes, sir, but she does not move a single inch.
Not an inch.
The uncle goes back to work, just ignoring her. He looks up several minutes later, and she is still standing exactly where she was.
That's when he gets furious.
He gets so mad. He tells her he's going to take a switch to her if she doesn't leave. And again, she says, yes, sir, but she stands her ground.
The bravery of this kid.
It's wild. Finally, the uncle absolutely loses it. He drops his work, grabs a barrel stave like a heavy piece of wood, and he marches toward her with pure rage. Darby is watching this, terrified, thinking his uncle is literally going to assault this child.
But look at the child's reaction here. This is the core of the philosophy. As this furious adult bears down on her with a weapon, she doesn't flinch.
She doesn't run away.
No, she steps forward, looks him dead in the eyes, and screams at the absolute top of her lungs, my mammy's got to have that 50 cents.
And it breaks him.
It completely breaks him. The uncle literally stops in his tracks. He drops the stave, reaches into his pocket, pulls out a $50, and just hands it to her.
And she takes the money and slowly backs out the door, never taking her eyes off him. Darby and his uncle were just stunned into silence.
It's a profound psychological event. You have to ask yourself, how did a child with zero physical or social power completely master a fierce, aggressive adult?
The text argues it was because she had a definite purpose.
Exactly. A definite purpose and an absolute unyielding persistence. She simply refused to accept defeat. Her desire wasn't a wish, it was an emotional absolute. The uncle's rage was strong, but her certainty was stronger.
So we have all these amazing stories of burning desire. But the sources don't just leave it at abstract parables, do they?
No, they don't. They provide a highly specific, 6-step practical formula.
A formula for transmuting desire into physical reality, specifically money. And I want to point out to you, the listener, that the text explicitly mentions these exact 6 steps were heavily scrutinized and fully endorsed by Thomas Edison himself.
Which lends immense credibility to the process. These aren't just, motivational platitudes. They were vetted by one of the most prolific, practical inventors in human history.
Exactly. So here is the 6-step roadmap. First, you have to fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. You cannot just say, I want plenty of money.
Right. The subconscious mind needs exact numbers.
Second, you must determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money. The text is incredibly firm on this. There is no such reality as something for nothing.
You have to provide value.
Third, establish a definite date by which you intend to possess the money, a deadline. Fourth, create a definite plan for carrying out your desire, and this is crucial, begin at once. Whether you feel ready or not, put the plan into action immediately.
Don't wait for the perfect moment.
Right. Fifth, write all of this down in a clear, concise statement. The amount, the time limit, the service you will render, and the plan.
And the final step.
Step 6. Read this written statement aloud twice daily. Once right before you go to sleep and once right when you wake up in the morning. And as you read it, you must see, feel, and believe yourself already in possession of the money.
I really want to focus deeply on those last 2 steps, because that is where people trip up.
The reading aloud part?
Yeah. Writing it down and reading it aloud might feel silly to some people, but look at the underlying mechanism. The text is explicit that these steps call for no hard physical labor.
Right, you aren't digging ditches.
Exactly. What they demand is imagination and emotional control. You have to work yourself into what Hill calls a white heat of desire. You are deliberately overriding your default psychological state.
Okay, let me push back a little here. I want to make sure I really understand the difference. Isn't desire still just a fancy word for wishing?
What do you mean?
Well, walk down the street and ask anyone if they desire $1 million. Literally every person on the planet will say yes. So what actually separates the wisher, who reads a statement twice a day, from the earner who actually gets the money?
That is the pivotal question. It's the difference between passive reception and active obsession.
Passive versus active.
Right. A wish is passive. It has no structural integrity. It lacks an actionable plan. And most importantly, it lacks sacrifice.
The what you will give in return part.
Exactly. When you determine what you will give in return, you are moving from wishing into commerce. A burning desire organizes your entire neurobiology around its achievement. It becomes the reticular activating system of your brain.
So you start noticing things you missed before.
Suddenly, you start noticing opportunities, conversations, and resources that were always there, but that you previously ignored because your brain didn't deem them essential for survival. A wish hopes the universe brings you $1 million. A burning desire turns your brain into a heat-seeking missile for the resources needed to earn $1 million.
That makes total sense. It's an internal reorganization, and the power of that obsession isn't just limited to making money either.
No, it's not.
The text actually pivots from wealth to something profoundly personal to illustrate just how powerful this force is. The author shares the story of his own son, Blair.
This is perhaps one of the most controversial and fascinating case studies in the entire text.
It really is. So Blair was born without any physical sign of years. The doctors examined him and delivered a devastating prognosis. They said the boy would be a deaf-mute for life. He just lacked the physical apparatus to hear.
A heartbreaking diagnosis.
But the author, Napoleon Hill, flat out refused to accept that reality. He decided, silently in his own mind, that his son would somehow hear and speak.
He essentially planted a burning desire for normal hearing into his son's mind through daily bedtime stories.
And he didn't just tell the boy, you will hear. He used incredible psychological strategy.
He deliberately designed these stories to convince the boy that his physical affliction was actually a priceless asset.
Reframing reality.
Exactly. He told Blair that because he lacked ears, his teachers would give him special attention, which actually ended up being true. He told him that when he was old enough to sell newspapers, people would pay him extra because they would admire his industriousness despite his handicap.
And it worked. The kid internalized this belief. At age 7, Blair shinnied out of a window, borrowed 6 cents from a local shoemaker, bought a stack of newspapers, and stood on a corner selling them.
He made a 42-cent profit on his very first day.
He wasn't a victim, he was an entrepreneur. And eventually, the story takes a massive leap when Blair is in college. He tries a brand new electrical hearing device.
Now, keep in mind, previous devices had failed completely. X-rays showed there was no natural hearing equipment, no opening in the skull to the brain whatsoever.
But this new device worked. For the first time in his life, he could hear practically perfectly.
And here's where the psychological programming really pays off. Because his father had spent decades programming Blair to see his challenge as an asset, Blair didn't just celebrate his new hearing and go live a quiet life.
What did he do?
He immediately saw a massive business opportunity. He analyzed the device, went to work for the hearing aid manufacturer, created a comprehensive plan to reach the hard of hearing across the globe, and ended up bringing relief to thousands of people while building an incredibly successful career.
He literally transmuted his deafness into his greatest asset. Now, the author believed that his persistent transmission of desire somehow spurred nature to miraculously bridge the gap between the boy's brain and the outer world.
We could debate the physiological mechanism there. Was it neuroplasticity, bone conduction, or just advancing 1930s technology catching up?
Right, but the psychological mechanism is undeniable. Desire, backed by unyielding faith, creates new realities.
Precisely. And that transitions us perfectly into the actual mechanics of how that programming occurs. A burning desire is the spark, but belief is the fuel. In the text, faith is described as the head chemist of the mind.
Right. The claim is that when faith is blended with thought, the subconscious mind instantly picks up the vibration. It translates it into its spiritual equivalent and transmits it to infinite intelligence.
That's the terminology they use.
Okay, time out. Infinite intelligence. That is a massive, loaded phrase. Are we talking about a religious deity here? Are we talking about God or the universe? Or is this like a 1930s metaphor for the collective unconscious? How does a thought actually transmit to this intelligence?
It's a great point of friction in the text. Hill was writing in the era of the New Thought movement, which heavily blended spiritualism with early psychology. But if we strip away the mystical terminology and look at the functional mechanism, infinite intelligence can be understood differently.
How so?
It can be understood as the interconnected web of human knowledge, opportunity, and emergent intuition. When you program your subconscious with absolute faith, your brain operates at a different frequency.
So it changes your behavior.
Exactly. You start acting, speaking, and deciding with a level of conviction that naturally draws resources, allies, and luck toward you. The universe isn't magically handing you a check. Your deeply programmed subconscious is navigating the complexities of reality to put you in front of the person writing the check.
And the tool used to program that subconscious is what the text calls autosuggestion.
Yes, autosuggestion.
This simply means self-administered stimuli reaching the mind through the five senses. It is the agency of control you use to feed your inner software. The text uses a beautiful metaphor for this. The subconscious mind is like a fertile garden.
Right. If you don't deliberately plant the seeds of desirable crops, weeds will grow in abundance.
The subconscious takes whatever orders it receives and just acts on them.
But here is the terrifying caveat. The subconscious makes absolutely no moral or logical distinction between constructive and destructive thoughts. It is a completely neutral execution engine.
So it will build whatever you give it.
It will translate a thought driven by paralyzing fear into physical reality just as quickly and efficiently as a thought driven by courage.
The text gives a chilling example of this negative autosuggestion in action. A bank official named Joseph Grant. He embezzled a large sum of money and lost it all.
When the bank examiner showed up to audit the books, Grant panicked and fled to a hotel room.
And for 3 days, he just lay in bed wailing, "My God, this will kill me. I cannot stand the disgrace." And shortly after, he literally died. The doctors called it mental suicide.
We might call it psychosomatic illness today or stress-induced heart failure. But the mechanism is exactly what Hill describes. Grant's subconscious took that repeated, highly emotionalized thought, "This will kill me," and executed it on his physical body.
Contrast that dark example with the power of positive faith. The text points to Mahatma Gandhi as the ultimate master of this principle.
A perfect contrast.
Here is a man with no money, no battleships, no standing army, no formal political power. Yet he wielded more potential power than any man living at the time. He influenced 200 million minds to coalesce and move in unison toward independence.
How? Purely through the contagion of absolute faith.
Gandhi is the macro example, of course, but returning to the realm of industry, the text provides a brilliant micro case study of faith and imagination in the Gilded Age. The creation of the United States Steel Corporation.
Oh, the Charles M. Schwab story.
Yes. The year is 1900. Schwab is 38 years old, relatively unknown outside of the Pittsburgh steel mills. He attends a dinner party at the University Club in New York.
And the room is filled with the nation's financial nobility.
The absolute kings of capital, including J.P. Morgan himself.
The stakes could not have been higher. Schwab is essentially an upstart in this room.
And Schwab has this vision. He has an idea for a massive steel trust that would prioritize efficiency, lower prices, and expand markets, rather than just acting as a monopoly to gouge consumers. He is asked to speak, and he stands up and delivers a 90-minute address.
But he doesn't just rattle off dry statistics or read a spreadsheet.
No. He paints a visionary picture. He combines a clear, highly practical plan with intense emotional voltage. He mesmerized J.P. Morgan so completely that when the dinner ended, Morgan spent another hour talking with Schwab privately and eventually agreed to buy out Andrew Carnegie and form U.S. Steel.
That 90-minute speech, backed by absolute faith and communicated with intense emotion, resulted in a syndicate profit of roughly $600 million.
From one single idea.
From one idea. But the core lesson here is the emotion. You cannot just repeat words like a parrot and expect J.P. Morgan to give you millions, or your subconscious to rewire itself.
Right, it's not just repeating affirmations.
The text stresses over and over that repeating a phrase like, "I am getting better and better," without mixing it with profound emotion or feeling, will yield zero results. The subconscious only recognizes and acts upon thoughts that have been well mixed with emotion.
I think of it like setting the thermostat in your house. If you just stand in your living room and whisper, "I want it to be 70 degrees," but you don't actually walk over and program the digital thermostat, which represents your subconscious with the precise electrical input, the furnace never turns on.
That's exactly it.
You can wish for warmth all you want, but without that actionable, emotionalized input, the system remains completely dormant.
That is a perfect analogy, because it highlights the necessity of the mechanism. You have to input the code, and that requires persistence. You have to repeatedly bathe your desires in the emotion of faith until the subconscious accepts it as fact and begins devising plans to achieve it.
Which brings up a really vital question for you, the listener. Think about the algorithmic feeds on your phone, the news you watch, the conversations you have. What negative auto-suggestions have you been feeding your own thermostat lately?
It's a scary thought.
Are you constantly repeating, "I'm terrible with money," or "my industry is dying," or "I'll never get out of debt"? Because if you are, your subconscious is eagerly taking those exact orders and making absolutely sure you act in ways that make them true. You are programming your own defeat.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But let's say you flip the script. You have the desire. You program your mind with absolute faith that is incredibly powerful, but belief without blueprints just builds castles in the sky. How do you actually execute if you don't have the technical skills?
This is where the philosophy gets incredibly practical, and where it confronts a very deeply held societal myth.
Which myth is that?
We have all grown up hearing the phrase, "knowledge is power." The text calls this out as fundamentally false. Knowledge is not power. It is only potential power.
Wait, really?
Just potential.
Yes. General knowledge, the kind you get a massive surplus of in standard universities, is practically useless for accumulating wealth on its own. Knowledge only becomes actual power when it is organized into definite plans of action and directed toward a definite end.
There is an amazing historical anecdote about Henry Ford that proves this point beautifully.
A libel suit.
Yeah. During World War I, a Chicago newspaper published an editorial calling Ford an ignorant pacifist.
Mm-hmm.
Ford, who was immensely wealthy and famous at this point, sued them for libel.
And in court, the newspaper's lawyers tried to prove to the jury that Ford actually was ignorant.
They badgered him with trivial academic history questions. They asked him things like, who was Benedict Arnold? And how many British soldiers were sent over in 1776 to put down the rebellion? They were trying to publicly humiliate him by exposing his lack of formal education.
Exactly. And Ford takes it for a while, but finally he gets tired of the circus. He leans over the witness stand, points his finger at the lead lawyer, and says, "If I should really want to answer the foolish question you have just asked, let me remind you that I have a row of electric push buttons on my desk."
I love this part.
He says, "By pushing the right button, I can summon to my aid men who can answer any question I desire to ask. Now, will you kindly tell me why I should clutter up my mind with general knowledge for the purpose of being able to answer questions when I have men around me who can supply any knowledge I require?"
It completely floored the courtroom, because Ford was defining true intelligence. As the text points out, the Latin root of the word educate is educo, which means to draw out, to deduce or to develop from within.
It doesn't mean cramming facts into your head.
No. An educated person is not someone with a head full of encyclopedic trivia. An educated person is someone who knows how to get the knowledge they need when they need it and how to organize it into a definite plan of action. And Ford accomplished this through his mastermind.
Let's define the mastermind because it's a foundational concept here. A mastermind is the coordination of knowledge and effort between two or more people working toward a definite purpose in a spirit of absolute harmony.
Ford didn't need to know history. He didn't even need to know the deepest mathematical principles of engineering. His mastermind group possessed that specialized knowledge.
Andrew Carnegie explicitly admitted he knew almost nothing about the technical end of the steel business. He was a master organizer of the men who did know.
Which completely vaporizes the most common excuse people use. I don't have the right degree, or I lack formal education. Henry Ford had less than a 6th grade schooling. Thomas Edison had roughly 3 months of formal schooling in his entire life.
You do not need to possess all the specialized knowledge in your own brain. You just need to know how to acquire it or how to ally yourself with people who already have it.
The sources also spend a lot of time discussing how to actually purchase and market this specialized knowledge. And they tell a story that I think is incredibly relevant right now, even though it took place during the Depression.
The story about the young woman and her son.
Yes. Her son had just graduated college, the economy was completely stalled, and he couldn't find a job. Now, normally, a person in that situation just hands out generic resumes, hoping someone takes pity on them. But the mother took a different approach. She helped her son create a 50-page plan book.
It was essentially a highly targeted, personalized pitch deck.
Exactly. It detailed his specific abilities, it deeply analyzed the prospective employer's company, and it laid out exactly what the son would do for that specific company to increase their bottom line.
He didn't ask for a job. He presented a solution.
He took this 50-page book to his first interview and was immediately hired as a junior executive at a starting salary that he essentially dictated himself. She merchandised his personal services so effectively that she arguably saved him 10 years of grinding away at the bottom of the corporate ladder.
We see that same aggressive strategic trajectory with Dan Halpin. Halpin was the student manager for the Notre Dame football team under the legendary coach Knute Rockne.
After college, Halpin was selling electrical hearing aids on straight commission. It was a tough gig.
But he applied Rockne's spirit, the refusal to accept the status of a loser, to his career. He refused to stay at the bottom. He aimed for assistant sales manager and earned it. Because of his excellent record, a rival company noticed him. He interviewed, demanded the role of sales manager, and within 6 months, he was vice president of the Acousticon division.
It's all about strategic positioning.
Okay, here is where I want to challenge the text because this gets really interesting. The text explicitly states that starting at the bottom is a bad idea because you get stuck in a rut. You get used to the daily routine, your ambition gets killed off, and you never lift your head high enough for opportunity to see you.
That's the argument.
But wait a minute. Doesn't literally everyone say you should pay your dues at the bottom? Isn't the classic American work ethic built on starting in the mailroom and working your way up?
It is the conventional wisdom, absolutely. But the text is arguing for strategic positioning over blind loyalty to hierarchy. Yes, you have to work incredibly hard, but working hard at the very bottom, where you have zero visibility and zero leverage, is wildly inefficient.
So you bypass it.
It is far better to acquire specialized knowledge, package it brilliantly like the 50-page plan book, and enter the organization at a level where your contributions are immediately visible to the people making the big decisions. You pay your dues by acquiring the specialized knowledge beforehand, not by sweeping floors for decades.
Unless, of course, you are Edwin Barnes.
Exactly. Barnes swept floors, but that sweeping was part of a very specific targeted infiltration plan. He was observing the mastermind from the inside.
And acquiring that specialized knowledge doesn't have to mean going back to a university for 4 years. The text mentions an unemployed grocery salesman during the Depression. He took a specialized accounting course.
He realized that small, independent merchants desperately needed bookkeeping, but couldn't afford full-time accounts.
So he started a portable bookkeeping business. He literally put an office in a delivery truck and drove from merchant to merchant. He acquired specialized knowledge, packaged it in a new way, and ended up making 10 times his previous income.
He identified a specific market gap, acquired the exact knowledge to fill it, and took action. But the real magic, the element that elevated it from a standard bookkeeping service to a fleet of mobile offices, was the application of the next principle: imagination.
The workshop of the mind. The text declares this boldly. Man can create anything which he can imagine. Imagination is the literal workshop where all of your definite plans are factioned, and the sources break this down into two distinct categories: synthetic imagination and creative imagination. Let's make sure we understand the difference.
Synthetic imagination is what the vast majority of us use on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It doesn't create anything fundamentally new out of the ether.
It's just rearranging things.
Right. It arranges old concepts, existing ideas, or standard plans into new combinations. It works entirely with the material of your past experience and education. The portable bookkeeping business is a flawless example of synthetic imagination, taking the existing established concept of accounting and combining it with the existing established concept of mobile delivery.
I always think of synthetic imagination like a modern DJ or music producer remixing existing tracks. They take a bass line from a 1970s funk record, they take a vocal hook from an obscure 1990s pop song, they put a modern 808 drum beat under it, and they create a massive multi-million-dollar hit.
That's a great modern equivalent.
They didn't invent the musical notes, they didn't write the original lyrics, but their synthetic imagination created a highly lucrative new combination.
Now, creative imagination, on the other hand, is entirely different. The text argues that creative imagination is a direct communication line with infinite intelligence. This is the faculty where sudden hunches, profound inspirations, and completely original ideas come from.
The light bulb moments.
Exactly. It operates only when the mind is vibrating at an exceedingly rapid rate, specifically when it is stimulated by the intense emotion of a burning desire. It is pulling the completely original melody out of thin air.
And both forms of imagination need to be deliberately exercised like a muscle, or they atrophy and become weak. To illustrate the raw power of imagination, the text tells one of the most famous business stories in American history, the story of the enchanted kettle.
Ah, Asa Candler.
Yes. Roughly 50 years prior to the book's publication, an old country doctor rode into a small town, walked into a drugstore, and sold a brass kettle, a wooden paddle, and a secret formula written on a slip of paper to a young drug clerk for exactly $500. Which was the clerk's entire life savings.
And that clerk was Asa Candler. And the secret ingredient that Candler added to that kettle was not a physical chemical written on the doctor's slip of paper. The secret ingredient was Candler's own imagination.
He took that raw chemical formula for a simple headache remedy and imagined a global empire. He imagined merchandising it, bottling it, and advertising it everywhere. That brass kettle gave birth to the Coca-Cola empire.
Incredible.
It created fortunes for thousands of people, it built cities, and it survived the Great Depression precisely because Candler's imagination transformed a localized headache syrup into a worldwide cultural phenomenon.
Another incredibly striking example of imagination specifically transitioning from desire to a definite plan is the story of Dr. Frank W. Gonzalez.
The clergyman in Chicago.
Right. He passionately wanted to reform the educational system. He believed in practical learning, learning by doing, rather than just rote memorization. He calculated that he needed exactly $1 million to start this new kind of college.
$1 million in the late 1800s. That is an astronomical sum for a clergyman.
It was. And for 2 solid years, he obsessed over it. He took the thought to bed. He woke up with it. But he made absolutely no progress.
Because he only had a vague hope. He didn't have a definite imaginative plan.
2 years of spinning his wheels. But then everything changes. He finally makes a definite decision. He tells himself, I am going to get this $1 million within a week.
A week.
He had no earthly idea how he was going to get it, but the decision was absolute. He immediately calls the local newspapers and announces that he will preach a sermon the very next morning titled, What I Would Do If I Had $1 Million.
Notice the timeline shift here. 2 years of passive wishing produced 0 results. But the moment he makes a definite, absolute decision and engages his imagination to create a specific action, the highly publicized sermon, things move at lightning speed.
He goes to the pulpit the next morning, and he is so consumed by his desire that he actually forgets his written notes. He just speaks straight from his soul. He paints a vivid, intensely imaginative picture of the institution he wants to build and the minds he wants to shape.
And when he finishes the sermon and sits down, a man from the congregation stands up, walks down the aisle, and introduces himself as Philip D. Armour, the enormously wealthy meatpacking merchant.
And Armour looks at him and says, I believe you can do it. If you will come to my office tomorrow morning, I will give you the $1 million.
That money founded the Armour Institute of Technology. 36 hours. He went from 2 years of wishing to acquiring 1 million mailers in 36 hours. Because ideas are intangible forces, but as the text argues, they hold far more power than the physical brains that give birth to them.
But we have to be brutally realistic here. You can imagine the perfect plan, you can make the definite decision to act, you can step out your front door with total faith, and boom, you hit a brick wall.
The plan fails.
Your plan fails miserably, the market rejects you, the investor says no. What happens then? That is where the philosophy separates the dreamers from the actual achievers, and where we move into the crystallization of desire, planning, decision, and persistence.
The text is incredibly forgiving yet uncompromising on this point. It states clearly that if your first plan fails, it does not mean your goal is impossible. It simply means your plan was flawed. That's it. You analyze the flaw, you build another plan, and you start again.
Thomas Edison failed 10,000 times before perfecting the incandescent light bulb.
Let that sink in. 10,000 times. He met with temporary defeat 10,000 times, but he never once accepted it as permanent failure.
To navigate through those inevitable defeats, you need the mastery of procrastination, which Hill simply calls decision. He analyzed over 25,000 men and women who had experienced failure, and he found that a lack of decision procrastination was near the very top of the 30 major causes of failure.
The findings are incredibly stark and binary, right?
Very binary. Successful people reach decisions promptly and change them very slowly, if they change them at all. People who fail reach decisions very slowly, and they change them quickly and constantly.
And tied intimately to decision is persistence. Persistence is the sustained daily effort necessary to induce faith. It is willpower combined with burning desire. We talked about Henry Ford earlier. He was constantly criticized by the press and his competitors as being obstinate or ruthlessly stubborn, but it was actually his ironclad persistence.
The V8 engine story is a perfect example.
Right. Ford decided he wanted a V8 engine cast in one single solid block of metal. He drew up the plans and gave them to his engineers. Every single engineer told him it was physically, thermodynamically impossible to cast an 8-cylinder engine block in one piece.
And Ford's response was simple. Produce it anyway, and stay on the job until you succeed, no matter how much time is required.
They worked for 6 months, totally failing. They worked for another 6 months, still failing. The engineers kept telling him it was impossible, but Ford wouldn't let them quit.
And finally, the impossible secret was discovered, and the Ford V8 dominated the market.
The sources outline 4 specific, actionable steps to cultivate this kind of persistence. 1, a definite purpose backed by burning desire for its fulfillment. 2, a definite plan expressed in continuous action.
3, a mind closed tightly against all negatives and discouraging influences, including negative suggestions from relatives, friends, and acquaintances.
And 4, a friendly alliance, a mastermind with one or more persons who will encourage you to follow through with both plan and purpose.
The text also provides a massive, incredibly thorough self-analysis checklist, the 30 major causes of failure. It challenges the reader to go through them honestly. These include things like a lack of self-discipline, procrastination, lack of well-defined power of decision, and wanting something for nothing, which he calls the gambler's mindset.
But one of the most intriguing and frankly controversial causes of failure mentioned is the lack of controlled sexual urge.
Okay, we have to talk about the elephant in the room here, sex transmutation.
This concept throws a lot of modern readers off. Let's delve into what Hill is actually arguing. The text defines this as harnessing the absolute most powerful of all human biological desires and deliberately redirecting that intense energy away from mere physical expression and into creative and professional endeavors.
The argument is that this drive is so potent, so deeply ingrained in our survival biology, that if you can channel it into your imagination and your persistence, it can elevate you to the status of a genius.
It is essentially an energy transfer concept. Think of it like a steam engine. The emotion of sex is the boiling water creating massive kinetic steam pressure. Most people just leave the release valve open, allowing that steam to dissipate uselessly into the air through constant physical expression or distraction.
The highly successful individuals analyzed by Hill apparently learned to cap that valve. By suppressing the immediate physical release, the pressure builds exponentially, and they learn to pipe that intense kinetic energy directly into the pistons of their business and creative plans. They use biological drive to fuel intellectual endurance.
That is a fascinating way to look at it, redirecting dopamine and biological imperative toward a balance sheet or an invention. But let me push back on the broader idea of persistence for a moment. Is it possible to be too persistent?
What do you mean?
When does persistence cross over into pure blind stubbornness that just ruins you financially or emotionally? If Ford's engineers had never figured out the V8, he would have just burned money forever and bankrupted the company.
That is exactly why the mastermind and specialized knowledge are required as safeguards. Persistence without a sound plan or accurate knowledge is indeed just stubbornness. It's foolishness. But true persistence, as defined in this philosophy, involves continuous action combined with continuous adaptation.
So you don't just repeat a bad plan.
Exactly. If a plan fails, you don't blindly persist in doing the exact same thing. You use your mastermind to analyze why it failed, you adjust the blueprints, and you persist with the new plan. You don't bang your head against the same brick wall. You persist in finding a way over it, under it, or around it.
The ultimate historical examples of this kind of absolute decision and persistence, as noted in the text, are the signers of the Declaration of Independence and Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation.
The 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence literally staked their lives on that single decision.
If the revolution failed, every single one of them would have been hanged for high treason by the British Crown. It was a decision made with absolutely no possibility of retreat. It was freedom or death. That is the highest manifestation of burning the boats.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most difficult hurdle of all. You can listen to this entire deep dive. You can cultivate the desire, program the faith, acquire the specialized knowledge, spark your imagination, and build a definite plan.
But there are specific psychological phantoms that haunt the human mind, paralyzing our ability to persist. If you don't clear these phantoms out, the system crashes.
Yes, the mind killers, the 6 ghosts of fear, and the 57 alibis.
The sources state unequivocally that before any of this philosophy can actually be put into practical use, you must sweep your mind clear of 3 specific enemies: indecision, doubt, and fear. The text says indecision crystallizes into doubt, and those two blend together to become fear. And this fear manifests in 6 basic forms.
The 6 basic fears are the fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death.
Now, Hill argues that the fear of poverty is, without question, the most destructive of the 6. It paralyzes reason, destroys imagination, kills off self-reliance, and leads directly to procrastination.
In fact, he argues that the Great Depression was largely caused and prolonged by this exact fear. Mass thought closed itself in physical reality. Everyone started thinking about poverty, expecting poverty, and hoarding their resources out of fear, which ground the entire global economy to an absolute halt.
That fear of poverty is so primal, and then there's the fear of criticism, which absolutely destroys initiative. People are terrified of what their family, their neighbors, or society will think of them if they try something new and fail.
The text notes how people will buy clothes they don't even like and can't even afford just because they fear the criticism of being out of style.
Hill even admits his own vulnerability here. He almost didn't write this very philosophy because he was terrified. The critics would say, "Who are you to write about success? Why aren't you as rich as Carnegie?"
It's a universal paralysis. And beyond those 6 basic fears, there is a 7th evil, which Hill colorfully calls the devil's workshop.
The susceptibility to negative influences.
Yes. It is allowing your mind to be poisoned by the pessimistic attitudes, the cynicism, and the negative suggestions of the people around you. You have to actively, aggressively shield your mind from this input.
And if you don't shield your mind, if you let the fear win, you end up relying on what the book calls the 57 alibis. This is the national pastime of explaining away failure. It's the endless game of if only. We all know them. If I had money, if times were better, if I had a college education, if my boss liked me, if I lived in a different city.
Which forces a very uncomfortable question. How do we actually combat these ghosts? The text provides a fascinating Stoic answer. It says a state of mind is something that you assume. You cannot buy it, you cannot borrow it, you must create it. You combat fear by reaching a firm, absolute decision.
You simply decide, once and for all, that nothing life has to offer is worth the price of worry. You decide to accept whatever comes without anxiety.
And regarding those 57 alibis, Hill points out the ultimate, most painful alibi of all, the one nobody ever says out loud. If I had the courage to see myself as I really am, I would find out what is wrong with me and correct it.
That is brutal, piercing honesty. I like to think of these 6 ghosts of fear and the 57 alibis as malicious computer viruses constantly running in the background of your mental operating system. You don't always see them on the screen, but they are draining your battery, they are throttling your processing power. And if you don't run a rigorous antivirus scan and physically delete them, they will eventually crash your entire system, your ambitions, your goals, your life.
And that self-analysis checklist provided in the text is the antivirus scan. It demands that you sit down in a quiet room and rigorously, painfully examine which of these fears and alibis are currently running in your background code.
So speaking directly to you, the listener, right now, which of those 57 alibis are you currently using? Which specific, if only, is justifying why you haven't started that business or why you haven't asked for that raise or why you haven't learned that new skill? Because until you delete that alibi, the rest of the 13 steps we just discussed are absolutely nothing but academic theory.
Exactly. The roadmap only works if you actually get in the car, put it in drive, and take your foot off the brake.
All right, let's briefly recap this incredible journey we've been on today. We started with definite desire, not a fleeting wish, but a burning, boat-burning obsession.
We fueled that desire with absolute faith, meticulously programmed into the subconscious via autosuggestion.
We then acquired specialized knowledge, utilizing a mastermind to fill the gaps in our own education. We synthesized all of that raw material in the workshop of the mind using imagination.
We crystallized it into physical reality through definite decision and unyielding persistence.
And finally, we cleared the road ahead by conquering the ghosts of fear and deleting our alibis.
It is a brilliantly comprehensive, cyclical system. Each step reinforces and relies upon the others. You cannot skip a step and expect the engine to run.
It really is a masterpiece of personal architecture, and I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We talked extensively earlier about the author's son, Blair Hill, who transmuted his total deafness into a massive career and personal asset. We talked about Asa Candler, who transmuted an old brass kettle and a slip of paper into the global Coca-Cola empire.
So look closely at your own life.
What if the very obstacle you are facing right now, the lack of formal education, or the perceived physical handicap, or the brutal financial disadvantage that you have been complaining about, perhaps using one of those 57 alibis to justify your current position, what if that is actually the exact raw material you are meant to use to build your ultimate success? What if your biggest disadvantage is actually your secret ingredient? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We challenge you to take these 13 principles, apply them to your own ambitions, burn the boats, and start building your definite plan today.